Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video number 383, The Beast of Gevaudan, Redux. Of course, I did a video several years ago on this topic. I have now become convinced, before it was, there are like three different possibilities. Hyena, it fits some of the descriptions, lion, subadult male specifically, and then some sort of wolf-dog hybrid, a very, very large one that grew to abnormal proportions for some genetic reason or something. I have now settled on the culprit, and I think I know exactly how it got to France, and I think I know exactly what happened. I think there is a cover-up involved. It is a bit of a conspiracy. It almost fits in with a few of the sub-elements of Brotherhood of the Wolf, but we'll get into that. I have identified the culprit. It was a subadult male lion, and I'll tell you exactly why. I was looking at the art with regards to detailing what the beast looked like, including after it was supposedly shot, although I have a feeling that was actually a different animal entirely. That's where the plot fits in with Brotherhood of the Wolf. I think that the animal did in the end die. It didn't actually have offspring or something. The story takes a weird turn and becomes disconnected when the king's personal arquebus bearer goes and hunts the animal. That's later on. It had already raged for some time. Of course, the French military got involved. The local regulars were attempting to track the beast. They had a reputation for not being fond of the public and saw them as rubes and mistreated them, stole food and shit, and probably raped women, and then they'd trot around through the cabbage patches with reckless abandon, and people got pissed at them really quickly. Here's what I think happened. Around this exact same time is around the time that the French are beginning to penetrate deeper beyond the coasts of Africa. The British are doing the same. This is, by the way, this is why we know it's not a thylacine, although the description does fit. The ropey tail with the tuft, the strange face, that would fit a thylacine. The problem is that Australia hadn't been invented yet in the mid-1700s. Look at the time period. Early colonial expansion. The French military is going up rivers and traversing jungles and talking to locals, and they're meeting all sorts of interesting animals. The only other one that kind of fits would be that they got a panther from South America, but those don't have a stripe down their back, and that's the tell. Every time that this beast is referenced, detailed, and illustrated, we come upon several things. It had a long tail with a prominent tuft on the end. It had a stripe down its back. It had a patch on its chest. It's a subadult male lion. The reason why the illustrations look more like a wolf is stylization. Of course, those people hadn't seen the animal. They could not imagine, because most of them didn't even know they existed, none of them could imagine a lion because they had never seen one. They hadn't been to Africa or something. And so when they drew about it, or when they described it, they painted it as though it was a canid, because they weren't used to big cats. And so they stylized it. And so all sorts of demonic aspects are added too. All of a sudden, an animal that is large, is bigger than a wolf, certainly. A subadult male lion would dwarf the average wolf by a good 100 pounds. This accounts for, by the way, its behavioral profile. It was very fond of attacking faces and necks. It was very fond of strangulating people. And because it didn't technically know how to hunt well, because it was raised in captivity, again, I will explain the timeline, that's specifically why it would gut people and then wander off. It didn't understand normal predatory behavior in the sense that a subadult male lion typically would. Here's what I think happened. A French noble, or a French noble's people, or a military commander of some sort was in Africa. And they shot a lion, and then they found that it had a cub around. The cub, of course, is sad and pawing at the dead body. It's very much like Lion King or something. So shed some fucking tears. And, they probably mounted the adult as a trophy, but then they said, well, this cub is awfully cute. I think my wife would enjoy this. Oh, it'd be a great present. What a great gift. Or, hey, the people back at the court, some marquis, some marquis is in Africa. He's the one that's going trophy hunting or exploring or doing whatever he wants to do. Some of them did have scientific minds, could have been a botanist or something. Decides to take it back home. Well, this will amuse the people back at the court. And so they brought it back. Now, little lion cub. It's not particularly dangerous unless you leave it with a little kid. And it tumbles around and does cute kitty things, and they pat it on the head, and they probably gave it a nice enclosure and shit. Now, what is the problem? They didn't realize how quickly baby lion becomes subadult lion, and they didn't realize how far they can jump and how easily they can climb objects. They probably had an enclosure at their chateau with a wall around it and figured, look, we've got a cage on one side, the wall on the other. It's not going anywhere. It's got its little cock shed, and we feed it, and it's all happy. Look, you know, it's too big to pet now, but it still impresses the guests. And then it escaped, because they didn't realize how far lions can jump. They thought that that 10-foot wall was insurmountable, and the lion figured out, hey, you know, I can pretty much scrabble over the side, and it disappeared. Now, under French law at the time, what is the problem for the nobleman or the military commander, whoever happened to net the animal? The problem is that you're liable for the damages done by that animal, and you don't have a fucking clue where it happened to go. You don't know. The fact that the attack patterns are all around a relatively small area too, by the way, indicates the kind of territoriality one would expect from a singular animal that is repeatedly driven from spot to spot. Not necessarily what would be done with a pack of wolves, and you would need more than one to have this many attacks, by the way, because unless the animal were sick, it wouldn't be behaving that way. This animal was raised in captivity. We know this due to the astonishing number of attacks. It simply didn't know how to predate upon the wildlife, and humans it was used to. It probably injured a human at some point and became a man-eater. Just by default, it was getting its food handed to him through the bars, and at one point it latched onto some person's hand and ripped it the goddamn hell off, and realized that humans are tasty and they're not particularly able to fight back. Having no fear of humans, it probably wandered around in some of these suburbs, the outer areas of Gevaudan and attendant areas, scavenging, trash mainly, eating small rodents, a lot of rats around. And again, at some point, people said, oh, there's this big animal, it attacked livestock and shit. They start locking themselves up inside, and the animal begins ambushing people because of the scarcity of resources. Livestock's easier to hunt than wild animals because they're in a pasture. They can't maneuver as much now, can they? So the animal did the natural. And it was covered up. And the nobleman at that point did one of two things. Probably either sent a communique to Paris saying, hey, there's a big goddamn problem and I need some help. Hey, why don't you send that hunter over here? Which would explain the timing. Or just said to all of the people in the court that had seen the lion, don't tell anyone that we had one of these. Just forget about it. It'll die in the winter. Don't worry. It's an African animal. It's not used to the cold. I think that they fully expected it to die. When the first few attacks came through, they're like, okay, there's going to be some attacks. I'm sorry about that, but in the end, everything will be fine. Now, in the end, they did shoot an animal that coincided with the end of attacks. And it happened to be a large adult wolf. Here's what I think happened in the end. They had shot the lion, but then they realized, because again, the people that were sent to kill the beast weren't peasant rubes. They were classically educated and had had literal experience in Africa. They had seen lions before. They realized what they were seeing and said, shit, this is going to be a hell of a scandal. The peasants are already pissed off anyway at us, both for our local and our national endeavors. The revolution is pending here. They're already pissed. If they find out that some rich, effete nobleman brought back an African animal and that we failed to catch it for several years, number one, we have to pay all these motherfuckers because we're the ones responsible. Probably not going to be able to identify the nobleman, by the way, involved. That's a problem. And number two, people might goddamn riot. So they took the lion, they buried that carcass separately. It's probably laying there somewhere in southern France out in the woods. At some point, they will probably dig up the bones of a subadult male lion, unless it was thrown in the river or burned to ashes or something. That's possible too, and that will prove, by the way, the theory. You'll find wounds consistent with it being shot with a musket, if that turns out to be the case. Go and do some ground exploring there. See if I'm not right. Look under the roots of trees too, because it's possibly in a forested area, probably around Montmouchet, if I had to guess. That's what happened, and then they killed separately a very large wolf, and they just said, okay, if it's on the big side, people will believe it. The beast is dead, so we can corroborate it. We'll bring the wolf back and we'll put it on display. We'll stuff it literally like Brotherhood of the Wolf style. They would overstuff it, give it red eyes, tassel up its fur a little bit, paint a little bit of a ridge on its back. You got to make it look the part. Paint the little white goofiness on the front, and people identified it as the beast because it had been taxidermied. They altered its appearance. They did that to cover up what really happened. Ironically enough, conspiracy theory fits better to the evidence than the idea that that was actually the animal responsible because of the number of attacks and the feeding pattern. It indicates a captive animal that became a man-eater. Well, I mean, it's not a wolf. A wolf would not fit the size dimensions. Wolves don't have long, prominent tufts on their tails and spikes down their back and all of these things. They have a rather elongated snout, not a blunted one like a lion has, and they certainly don't have what effectively is a mane on their chest. This beast has been transmogrified in an occult manner, but it describes a real living, breathing thing. It's just an exotic that nobody recognized until people who were more well-traveled showed up. Until then, like the French regulars that originally hunted it, they described it as wolf-like. They had never been to Africa. Those were local regulars. They were tasked with marching around in that zone anyway. They were effectively military police. They weren't foreign service. They didn't have any fucking clue about what a lion was. Half of them were probably illiterate. So were the peasants. They just wanted to farm their crops, and there's a lion killing their cattle and shit. That is the only thing, in my opinion, that best fits the Beast of Gevaudan. Originally, I had said a hyena was the best fit. Upon further review of available evidence, no. Hyena is a distant possibility. The only thing that fully fits is a subadult male lion that was imported, raised in captivity from cubhood, escaped, and then there was a small-scale resultant cover-up for political reasons. That's about all. Peace out.